whole nother level, but still keep it ghetto. Whole nother level, but still keep it ghetto. Whole nother level.
Welcome to episode 22 of The Process of Hip Hop. I'm Brian Joseph, writer, blogger at theprocessofhiphop.com. And as always, it's all about the process. In today's interview segment, I'll be talking to Otis Mensah. Otis Mensah is an MC from the UK, so let's get into it.
I'd like to welcome to the Process of Hip Hop, all the way from the UK, Otis Mensah. What's going on, my G?
Hello, man. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Otis, man, thank you so much for joining the show. Tell me about how you first got started in hip hop. What were some of your early influences, and what made you start wanting to rap?
Yeah, sure. So, I think on a sort of way more subconscious level, it began as a child, really. You know, my dad was a hip hop DJ, so there was two Technics quartz around the house, and he always had vinyl of all the classics. But of course, I was way too young to sort of take that in, and well, I think I took it in, but I was way too young to sort of consciously adopt it, you know. And my mum was always interested in poetry and always had an inclination to write poetry. Again, I believe I was too young to really take true influence. However, I feel that this planted a seed, and then, you know, sort of later on in life as a teenager, as you do, you're dealing with sort of an existential angst. You've got this quarrel with identity. And being from the UK, I got into grime music. You know, it's like everyone was writing, everyone was rapping in school. And that felt true, and it felt really authentic to begin with. But I think somewhere down the line, I think I struggled to see myself represented in grime music. You know, it's like I think often I was trying to portray or trying to pretend to be this hyper masculine, macho character, you know, and talking all this grease that just definitely wasn't true. Do you know what I mean? So then I sort of went back to, I guess, the seed that my parents had planted, which was hip hop in many ways, and I started to delve into Tribe Called Quest, Pharcyde, The Roots, and then it was just transformative. You know, I think from there I really started to build my identity around this culture, this beautiful culture of hip hop, and it taught me that I could be vulnerable, I could be open, but I had to be honest. And before, I wasn't being honest. You know what I mean? Like, so though for grime artists who are sort of the forefathers in the UK, they're being totally honest through their art most of the time. You know, I imagine. But for me, it came with pretense, and hip hop provided an opportunity for me to be honest with myself and sort of learn who I am. You know.
Mm-hmm. Were there any? You said Tribe Called Quest. Were there any other artists that you either patterned yourself after, or did you kind of adapt an original style, or who were some of the artists that were absolutely influential to you crafting your style?
So I think that's a great question, by the way. I think it sort of came in phases. So at first, you know, the first time I was sort of introduced to hip hop, or I reintroduced myself to hip hop, it was way more, you know, the focal point was, you know, I can rap. I'm an MC. I'm gonna give you 100 million bars of madness. So that's how it started. And don't get me wrong, I don't slam artists who focus on that point. You know, so I think that's a beautiful thing about the culture, being able to flex your technicality. So, you know, in that sort of realm, I think I was, I don't know, maybe influenced by, I don't know, maybe people like Redman, who I was coming across, Jamal, who I was coming across. And yeah, it's still a bit of Tribe Called Quest. I was taken from Fife. I thought Fife always like had this incredible way of flexing how great he was. You know, it's like so prolifically, so sort of elegantly. So Tribe, definitely, I became obsessed with Tribe. But I think in my obsession with Tribe, that sort of opened my ears to a different kind of sound, you know. So it fell into that. And then I think one album that really changed everything for me was The Roots, Things Fall Apart. Yes, and man, when I heard that, it sparked like I just wanted to. I was like, "What is this?" Like half of the things I didn't understand, and I just wanted to hear more, and I wanted to learn about the culture. And man, Blackfoot's the gatekeeper. Mm-hmm. You know, but of course, there's Nas, there's even people like Kid Cudi who were really vulnerable, sort of like, and spoke about depression and anxiety. Childish Gambino, for say. But I would say my gateway drug was the Roots, Things Fall Apart.
Yeah, when I listen to your music, man, and I've even seen some of your videos, you definitely have an animated style that's reminiscent of Redman, of Busta Rhymes.
Wow.
I would even say, even a little bit of the way the group Onyx was back in the early '90s, very animated. So it's like when I watched that, I was wondering, and so you said Redman, so that and I think many times people don't always embrace their influences, and I always say, it's great too, because every musician does that. No one is completely original. People take bits and pieces from. So the fact that you talk about Roots, you talk about Tribe, Redman, again, Nas, those are obviously some great MCs. What was your, as you started to craft yourself, your style, your artistry, what was the first project where you felt like, you know what, Otis Mensah, I am an actual artist? Tell me about the very first project you had.
Yeah, so just scaling back a bit, I think I forgot to mention actually another sort of imperative album to me. It's like that really led to that animation. I completely slipped my mind. Deltron 3030, man. Del the Funky Homo Sapien.
Oh yeah,
it's my life. So that's where
some people don't know about that. That's going back late '80s, early '90s now.
Yeah, man. Incredible MC, incredible project, So yeah, Del, and then I think it was a lot of I can't remember who says it. Is it Miles that says you got to play a lot in order to play like yourself, or something of that nature? I'm paraphrasing. But it took a lot of playing and a lot of imitating in order for me to sort of find something that's reminiscent of who I want to be. And I think the first project that I felt comfortable with sharing under the name of Otis Mensah, given that that's my own name, I wanted to, I made this transition from other rap names, and then I sort of was like, this is going to be the honest version of myself. I'm going to use my own name. And I think the first project that sort of opened that door was a mixtape I created called Days Over Damson, which was, again, I don't think I'd fully fell into my own original style. I was still very hugely influenced by, people I'm big fans of, like Rhymesayers and Atmosphere, Aesop Rock, POS. So still wearing my influences on my sleeve in many ways. But that project, I said, I'm gonna go on YouTube, find some of my favorite Jay Dilla instrumentation in the vein of what it is to just rap, and I'm going to tell my story. And it came about at a time where I'd been studying. I'd been studying in the south of the country, and my studying had finished, and it was time for me to come home. And I was sort of reluctant. I wanted to live down south, but I couldn't afford it. So I moved back home, moved back into my mum's, and this sort of gave me this whole surge of melancholy and sort of I guess nostalgia, sort of feeling of crippling nostalgia, because I was always looking back and tried to recreate what I just experienced during my studies, Yes. However, as nature has it, these sort of feelings make for great art, So I felt like I could really share that story and what that moment in my life was about,
Mm-hmm. And so that was the very first project. What are some things that you're currently working on, as far as, I know you dropped some new music, and I'm gonna definitely post that in this episode, man. But sure. Tell me about the current project that how is that transition from what you were working on to what you're working on right now?
For sure. So I think a big sort of transformational sort of moment in me making music was meeting a friend of mine called The Intern. I got booked for my first show in Berlin. I was working at a hotel doing pot washing, and man, I just felt so depressed, and it's like I was literally taking all my money. Of course, I had the huge privilege of not having to pay rent at my mum's house, but I was taking all the money from my job, putting it into music videos for Days Over Damson. And it was depressing, because it's like I wasn't seeing the yield of what I felt like I was reaping, and sort of not having a social life, just focusing on the art solely, definitely took its toll. But I felt every time I would sink deeper into these feelings of sadness, something would pull me out, and it was always an opportunity of some sorts. And this time it was I'd sent some email to different organizations in Berlin. I came across this incredible one called Poetry Meets Hip Hop, and they said, sorry, we missed your email. I know we're about 6 months late, but we've got a show coming up in 2 months. If you want, we'll cover your transport, we'll cover accommodation, and we'll see if there's any money to give you at the end, sort of. And man, I'd never received money for a show before, let alone have someone fly me to a different country. So man, this sort of lifted me. And during my time in Berlin, I met a good friend, well, someone who's now a good friend, called The Intern, and he was working at SoundCloud at the time. And he said, yo, why don't you come to SoundCloud? I'll show you around. So I went to SoundCloud, thinking that this is like, oh man, this is crazy. I'm in SoundCloud, really relishing in the moment. And then we walk into the SoundCloud studios, and he has a beat, so like on his laptop, and I was like, oh man, I didn't know that it was this kind of meeting,
Right.
And he played me what was to later become Creep and Crawl, a song of mine. I did a sort of series of singles. And this was still probably about 2016, 17. And that produced the artist relationship built there. And being a fan of people like Blue and Exile, it was like a beautiful thing to have someone who I felt had similar influences as me and loved soul, loved jazz, and taught me so much about music. So that was the birth of I guess a refined sound, and we sort of built a sound together. That led on to an EP called Mum's House Philosopher, which was just me and him, and I really sort of stood by that art as something that I was proud of, and performed that a lot around the country and in Europe. And then we moved on to Rap Poetics, which was a sort of an assortment of beats from different producers, but still had Intern's touch on it. He mixed and mastered it, and had a few beats on there himself. So that was sort of me finding my own way to play like myself, if you will. And then coming into that, sort of growing into my own voice, my own sound, I'm sort of redirecting myself from a place of expressing my issues with society, my issues with oppression, lots of external things, lots of sort of societal based things. I'm sort of with my new project that I'm working on now, drawing back into myself like I did when I was starting off, and trying to be more introspective, and I guess sort of delve into those feelings that I tapped into when I was young. And that's for a new series of mine called Otis Mensah Exists, which is essentially a series of singles,
Mm-hmm. Where would you like to, if you had to project your career, give me, 2 to 3 years from now?
Yeah.
Where would you like to see yourself, man?
Oh man, I've got what I consider to be very realistic dreams. However, it seems so far still,
Yeah.
I'd like to be touring. My main sort of passion and joy is for seeing the music translate into a physical space in a real environment. Obviously, with this whole Corona thing, everything's shut down anyway, so it's tricky to sort of try and realize that goal. But I'd see myself touring around Europe, around the UK. I'd see myself, maybe entering into the States a little bit within the sort of what would be considered the underground hip hop scene, I guess. And I don't know, man. Like I think for me, a lot of my sort of goals focus around my peers. It's like I'd love to tour with some of my favorites. I'd love to tour with, Open Mike Eagle and Rap Ferreira and it's like maybe have the opportunity to open my mind to that experience from the perspective of another artist, from the touring experience. And essentially, I'd love to pay some bills.
Of course, yeah, right.
Any bills.
Well, and the thing about it, I look at you, and not as an international hip hop artist. Years ago, it would be like, oh, you're an international hip hop artist, and
Sure.
Now because hip hop is so global, you're a hip hop artist. And hip hop has been international, from the beginning. I mean, I'm, going back to, again, a UK legend, Slick Rick, who,
Yeah.
you know, mid to late 80s was, you know, and still is widely considered, you know, one of the top MCs, great storyteller.
100%.
As far as, again, so that's where you would like to see yourself. Now, what is for people that want to stay abreast of what you're doing, on top of what you're doing, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. So I think it's best to sort of direct people to my YouTube channel. So that's youtube.com/Otis Mensah. So OTISMENSAH. And I say YouTube because you know, I'm a big fan of seeing the music sort of manifested with visuals. You know, I think we're in such a visual age now, and don't get me wrong, I enjoy listening to an album from start to finish, just me and the album, me and the art, you know. But in the vein of what's going on in the internet, I think it's nice for people to see what I'm about, you know, digitally. Yeah. With this series, Otis Mensah Exists. You know, we're accompanying each song with an original animation by a local artist here in Sheffield called Jim Spenlove. And I love animation. As I said, like, I'm a big fan of Del. And I think I have this super vivid memory of seeing the Gorillaz song Clint Eastwood, and then just hearing Del but not knowing who he was, and just seeing that animation and that whole world. And yeah, that definitely influenced me. So I like visuals to build a world around the music, you know.
And again, and I'm going to post on this episode. You definitely have that. Reminds me of the Jay Dilla artwork, you know, and that's where you're in the bed and you got so I think that's really cool. And I think also, Otis, all hip hop artists have a visual element to them, but because you're reminiscent of those visual artists that are very animated, it's almost like you have to see your music to really appreciate it. So very much like a Busta, like a Redman, where when you're watching them, you're seeing their emotion on their lyrics. And so again, I figured that was intentional by you, but it definitely once again reminded me of those artists who I actually love, both of them, and you know, even some of the others. But well, Otis, man, thank you so much, man, for joining the process of hip hop. Best of luck to you.
Thank you.
Again, let's keep in contact, man. When you release your next project, come back on the show, will you?
Definitely, man. Thank you so much.
Okay, take care.
Take care.
Whole nother level, but still keep it ghetto. Whole nother level, but still keep it ghetto. Whole nother level,
Process of Hip Hop is produced and edited by me, Brian Joseph. Executive produced by Dale Harewood. Music by DJ Big Mike of Roadside Records at roadsiderecords.com.